So, the Prime Minister visits Lismore, he meets locals, he announces even more financial help on top of the $350 million is handed out already. Extra disaster payments are coming, for instance. He also said, enough with all these delays in protecting Lismore from these regular floods. He was going to step in. Finally, some levees and channel works are coming.
Enough of the talk. People have known what needs to be done for a long time. That needs to be driven by the local decisions here, by the council. If further hydrology work is not required, then we will support that with additional funding to get that completed. But this isn't about if, this is about what and when.
Morrison also offered an excuse for people saying, why didn't you better prepare for this flood? It's an excuse all the leaders are now giving. They'd give it almost every natural disaster now. Who could have known it would be this bad? It's unprecedented. And in some areas, these were record floods. So, don't blame the government. How could they know? Joining me from Canberra is Andrea Crothers, Sky News senior reporter. Andrea, it's great to see you again. What reason has Scott Morrison and his team given for banning the media from filming his meeting with the locals at Lismore?
Good evening, Andrew. Well, we were told that there were going to be two events today in Lismore, so the press conference and then also a walkthrough of another business which would be set up. Now, neither of that is unusual, but typically when you see a Prime Minister or other politician go to these out-of-town events, as you would know, you see them do a bit of a street walk and chat with some of the locals and get up close and personal, hear some of the everyday Joe's concerns. Today, that didn't happen. Scott Morrison did go to a flood-affected farmer, but the media weren't invited. So we asked their office exactly why that occurred. They said that, well, obviously he's doing other visits as well, but you'd have to say if you're a bit more cynical and given an election round the corner, exactly what occurred at Cobargo a couple of years ago when he received that rather frosty reception there from bushfire victims, that they didn't want to sort of have any risk in terms of, I guess, having that repeat today again. We obviously did also hear the Prime Minister.
I mean, Scott Morrison. Yeah, well, you heard the Prime Minister say, look, I wanted to give them privacy. I think he wanted the privacy, not for them. But anyway, look, again, Andrea, there were some journalists at the press conference, angrily complaining that locals had to save their neighbours, as if, you should be able to put up your feet in a massive disaster like this and leave all the work to the government. Well, I thought, actually, the Prime Minister answered this very well. Here he is.
Some of them were even on kayaks, and if they had not been there, hundreds of people would have died. Yeah, so who do those people blame?
I think we have to be realistic that in any natural disaster, we don't have those resources which has ADF just waiting around the corner. I mean, we were assembling those resources, we were pre-positioning those people. In fact, there were ADF saving people with helicopters, winching them off roofs on Monday, and that was occurring. But in any natural disaster, everyone has a role to play. I think always there will be a community response in disasters such as this because the community is already there. And the resources move and they come in as you're seeing now, but they're not available on a moment's notice. And I think it's unrealistic to have that set as an expectation.
Now, Andrea, like I said, I thought there was a good answer, and I thought, the reality there should be obvious to everyone. But nevertheless, how much damage do you think Scott Morrison is copping on this issue?
Andrew, he did answer it quite well. It was similar to that sort of vein that Dominic Perrottet was using in the sense of saying, look, if it wasn't for these people doing it, people may have been more put at risk, and it's just the way that it really was in reality. But you'd have to say, regardless of all of that, Scott Morrison is copping some bark over this, losing some bark over this, because he's already on the nose at the moment, and a natural disaster never really fares well for anyone. Obviously, Scott Morrison was viewed very well at the start of the pandemic when he responded very quickly, but this time around, what we're really seeing with this disaster, unlike other natural disasters, is that usually when you've got that conversation around climate change and whether the government is doing enough action in that regard, this time there's none of that conversation, none of those responses of, oh, we should talk about that at a later date that's more respectful. This time the conversation isn't about climate change, it's about the timing of his response. And given that recent track record when it comes to things such as vaccines and other things that people like to go with that. It certainly works well into that narrative of the fact that Scott Morrison may be too slow to act on certain issues.
Yeah, well, he did get a couple of questions, one in particular about, is this global warming and why aren't you doing more, which I thought was crazy. And I'm afraid to say that Scott Morrison said, yes, this was about climate change. Climate change is making it worse, but I guess he's got to say that now or buy an argument that he can't win. Is the government privately conceding there was a problem with its flood response?
I think first and foremost, everyone have been, I guess, shocked at the sheer scale of the event and also how rapid it really evolved. But there's also been those questions around the Emergency Response Fund, whether they should have been doing things with that earlier since it was set up. But all in all, a lot of people were very well aware that this wasn't going to look good for them, particularly when you've got Scott Morrison already not as popular as he once was. But particularly, I guess, when it comes to how this then plays out in the campaign, I think that's more the optics of what they're concerned about at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. It's, as they say, give a dog a bad name. And I'm afraid Scott Morrison is paying for one misjudgment 2 years ago, and they won't let him forget.